Munster's long-awaited trip to La Rochelle certainly lived up to the hype as the Red Army travelled in huge numbers to witness another chapter in the province's storied European history. Leinster also delivered a serious statement over the weekend with a 62-0 rout of Harlequins to march into the quarterfinals, while Ulster bowed out after a spirited effort away to Bordeaux. There was also a Challenge Cup win for Connacht against Cardiff, and the reward is a blockbuster home tie against Racing 92 next Saturday night in Galway. So all in all, we have plenty to discuss on today's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. Luke Fitzgerald here with me in studio, and I'm delighted to be joined on the line by Jonathan Bradley. And Jonathan, we have to start with Munster 25, La Rochelle 24. We were both over there, and to say it lived up to the hype, I think, is the understatement of the century. It was one of those occasions that the Six Nations is great, but only the Champions Cup can deliver that specific kind of occasion in my mind. The colour, there's kind of like, I don't know how I'd even describe it. It's like a je ne sais quoi, given we were in France for the weekend. The drama, the hype, just the colour all weekend. Am I over-egging it for people who might not have been there, who might be listening? Like, am I being a little too prisoner of the moment, or was it as good as it kind of has lived up to in my own mind?
No, I thought it was amazing. It felt like very much like a Heineken Cup rather than a Champions Cup weekend, It felt really old school, I suppose, in that sense of all those Munster fans coming over to France. Like, there was talk of 2,000. It looked to me like there was way more than 2,000. I think the estimate now is somewhere around 3,000. So, and just the way that they packed out La Rochelle, like walking through, like arriving in on Friday night and walking through the town, it was still quiet enough, and then waking up Saturday morning and going out to get a coffee on Saturday morning, and it was just red everywhere that you looked. Like the whole way around the port in La Rochelle, it was just like a horseshoe of red jerseys everywhere. And obviously, like, the sun was belting, so everyone was having a great time. And then the walk out to the stadium as well, just the atmosphere was crackling. And then you get to La Rochelle, and then that's where all the La Rochelle fans are. Like, we hadn't actually seen too many of them throughout Saturday morning until we got to the ground. And I think that blend of supporters probably is what made for such a great atmosphere, because every time the Munster fans were singing in the ground, there was then this chorus of La Rochelle fans trying to drown them out and vice versa. And it just, like, the colour of the whole occasion, before we even get to the match, just the colour of the occasion just felt like something that was, I suppose, completely, that you would have seen 20 years ago in the Heineken Cup whenever Munster were in their pomp. But you sort of felt that there was a possibility that those kind of weekends had sort of gone away. And I understand that the other games across the weekend didn't have the same sort of sense of occasion, but it just felt properly restorative for the Champions Cup, I thought.
Yeah, it's funny because like the weekend was almost like it showed what the tournament can bring when it's at its absolute best. And we also, as you say, from the other scoreline, some very lopsided, one-sided games where kind of indicates that it just needs a complete revamp of the format to make sure we get more contests like Munster La Rochelle and less like some of the other one-sided games. But I agree with you. Like, I've seen a lot of La Rochelle from afar, like the big homecomings from the port when they won the Champions Cup, and watching a lot of the games, in the Stade Marcel de Flandre. I was getting like goosebumps even walking from the train station like into the port and kind of experiencing this for myself, and even going to the ground. It's for a stadium that's only 16,000. It plays so much bigger. It doesn't feel like you're in a small ground. That's like probably smaller than the RDS, but it felt so much bigger. So no, it was a fantastic weekend from start to finish. But for the match, Luke, you were obviously watching from afar, unlike myself and Jonathan, who were there. What was the winning and losing for you? Like, why did Munster ultimately, claim another famous away day scalp, do you think?
Well, sorry, the winning and the losing of it is probably a trickier one, given it was so tight, and certainly fine margins. You think about the try that's chalked off at the start of the match. I mean, I think the game might have taken on a different complexion if La Rochelle get that one. The Carvalho one that was kind of, I think, Teddy Thomas.
Yeah.
And in fairness, that was Abraham's.
That wasn't the first time he ended up missing a try scoring.
In fairness, that was a little bit unlucky.
Yeah, no,
he's right on the edge. And Abraham's, in fairness, it's a brilliant effort to try and make some kind of contact with him, to push him all the way to the edge. When you see Tomas get the ball there, you're kind of going, eesh, like that's, who's going to be stopping him from there. But that never say die attitude probably was the winning and losing of it, really, for Munster, wasn't it? I mean, he forces that, and all of a sudden they're kind of back in the game. It took the wind out of the sails a bit, because the referee took kind of quite a, I thought it was a little bit longer than maybe, it wasn't like a quick decision. It was like, the try is scored, everyone's back under the post, the referee takes a breath and goes, maybe I'll have a look at that actually, a little bit closer, and then obviously the try gets chalked off. So, Yeah, that was an interesting moment. It felt like a big moment. What else? I thought really, we were talking about it off air. The Munster pack, and I know Crowley, like, you know, he gets the plaudits for the big moment, right? But and we'll talk about him too. In his interview, he mentions the pack, and it's kind of one of those things that, you know, a playmaker, you know, you always want to give. It's like the quarterback, isn't it, with his offensive line? You just give him the credit, and you know, let them know it's job well done. But to my mind, that's not always true. It was so true on the weekend. I just thought physically, like, that is a seriously muscular La Rochelle pack. You know, really muscular. They were up for it. You could see the physicality they were bringing to the game. And they weren't that bad, but Munster were brilliant. I really thought they matched them, and to do that away from home against La Rochelle takes, you know, Herculean effort. And I mean, you try and pick out a name. There was definitely one or two, but I thought Klein and Byrne in the row, O'Mahony around the pitch as well. O'Mahony had some unbelievable kind of tackles. Even it wasn't always like he got the moment. Like Hodnett had a few of the moments where he gets the turnovers, but O'Mahony, some of the lads, he's hitting guys, hitting the kind of, you know, it mightn't have even been the tackler. Sometimes it was the latcher on the tackle. They were just so physical with them all day, and Byrne is just complete nuisance. I thought Klein was excellent as well. Like everything he hit, he caused a problem. I just thought they were brilliant. I thought defensively they were really muscular. I thought at the ruck they really slowed them down, and at times I was a little bit nervous watching them because I thought they kind of committed heavily enough sometimes to the breakdowns. And you could see a little bit of that from time to time if La Rochelle did get quick ball, which wasn't really that often, to be honest, or it wasn't messy. They were under pressure, but they scrambled brilliantly in those occasions too. So brilliant effort. I mean, the boys out the backs, you know, the backs did well as well. But really, I thought the winning and losing, probably, if you were asking me, and I would say, again, this is a knife edge, was 1-8. I thought they were unbelievable all day.
Yeah, because when you look at the team sheet, like that was the one area, you know, La Rochelle maybe missing a couple of guys in certain areas, but you thought maybe they had an advantage in the pack. But as you say, you mentioned maybe 5 or 6 guys who gave probably arguably the best performances of their career. And that's like that was
Byrne, I think, has that every week.
Okay, maybe not Ty Byrne, yeah.
And O'Mahony, we kind of have seen that on the big days, so we're kind of used to that too. But I thought Klein, you know, I think he's very, you know, he just had his injury concerns this year, but generally he's a pretty solid operator too. But he did play unbelievable. I thought the first 20-25 minutes, I was like, that is a serious effort that he's putting in there to compete with that La Rochelle pack. You know, and they managed Skelton very well. I thought Aldred, I did mention Crowley there. I just thought he was so good. His tackling was unbelievable. Like, you just don't have to worry about that one, honestly. And it sounds like a small thing to say, but I just thought, like, you know, your pack see that, they see you putting in the effort, and, you know, it galvanises the whole team. It galvanised the two the centre pairing outside you, who had a very tough task to try and contain Thomas. Look, he was a bit of a handful at times, but they managed that, I thought, quite well. That pace he has, you know, if he has time, and as I said, anytime they got quick ball, you're kind of going, oof, like he was just... He's difficult to contain, isn't he? Like, he's a real threat going forward. But then he has his moments too, doesn't he? He's, you know, that try when, I mean, how he doesn't just run that into the corner. I'm pretty sure, like, maybe he thought they were backs. He didn't recognise the bodies. But I mean, I think, like, Zeebs gave him a good ribbing in the commentary box. Yeah. How he just doesn't run in the corner there and just dot that down. He tries to go under the post, but you know, Munster scrambled unbelievably well. But there was these moments all throughout the game, and I thought Crowley, who everyone's going to talk about his big moments, but if you ask me what I was so impressed with, I did think his tackling was unbelievable. Like, Aldred targeted him all day. Skelton, anytime he got a chance to run over him, he tried. Antonio, like, these guys, like, these are all massive men, and he just got stuck in. Brilliant technique. You know, there weren't dominant hits, but God, he didn't get dominated either. You know, I thought he was so impressive and really led the team from the front. And Casey as well, we talked about him last week against Connacht. He had an impact. He had a real impact on this game. I thought his delivery was good. I thought his kicking was excellent.
I thought his kicking was phenomenal. It reminded me of Maxime Luku when he came off the bench at the Aviva a few weeks ago and just had some of these booming kicks. And, like, in 10 years' time, when we look back on this weekend, we won't necessarily remember, like, 2 or 3 clearances that got 10 metres more. But at the time, I was like, felt like they were big moments, because making La Rochelle start from 15 metres further back with line-out ball, that adds up over the course of a game.
No, it does. And I think the kick to compete as well, he was really good there, like, because that's something that you wouldn't want to do against that La Rochelle back three, is to give him too much time and space. And I thought they did that really well. They chased really, really hard all day. I thought they were very organised for the most part in their kick chase. And yeah, Casey's a big part of that, like how you kick there. The one thing I would say with Crowley, and it was kind of mentioned in Six Nations, I thought he was better. He had a few brilliant ones later on in the game, but I did think there was a few penalties at the start of the game where I thought his kicking to line, he needs to be more aggressive. That's the one, because I want to try and be a little bit balanced here. because he was unbelievable on the weekend. And if you're picking an Irish team next week, he's my starting 10 off the back of that performance. I thought he was unbelievable. And probably unfair because Prendergast plays against a Quins team who run out the gate in Croke Park. So that's not his fault. But I just thought Crowley was unbelievable, brilliant leadership. I do think he needs to take a bit more ownership and he needs to be a bit more aggressive with his line kicking off penalties, particularly. There was a few where he just got 10 metres and stuff where they were easily should have been a 25, 30 metre kick. He could have taken a little bit more pressure off the pack at the start of the game. I just thought that was the one, for doing cliff notes, that's the one area.
Yeah, Jonathan, it was such a great game of momentum swings as well. Luke mentioned the early try that was disallowed. They obviously go over pretty soon after that anyway, but like the Tacker Abrahams, creating that moment for Craig Casey, like Munster were under the pump at that stage, but the big momentum shift and any analysis of the game that doesn't have the Teddy Thomas moment in the first 2 or 3 lines is probably not doing a service to how big a blunder that was, because 2.5 minutes later Gavin Coombs is making that great block down, controlling it and scoring the try. And talk about a swing in momentum, like it's an unfathomable. Sorry, I was going to say unfathomable, but knowing who it actually is quite fathomable, because he's had a kind of a career of maybe bloopers as well. But it was just such a bad mistake, because as Luke said there, I hadn't considered it. Maybe in the heat of the moment he didn't realise it was 2 front rows ahead of him and thought it was 2 backs, or maybe he just wanted to cut in under the post and didn't realise there was more covering defenders. But that's like a 10 out of 10 try if he goes to the corner, it looks like.
His head is down though, Jonathan, do you know, because the ball is kind of bouncing to him a little bit, isn't it? And then he has to go down. So like that's the one thing, and I wonder, does he see just the red in front of him? You're trying to put yourself in the boots. But sorry to interrupt, but it was that was a moment I thought he was kind of maybe a little bit harsh, but yeah.
What was your read on that moment, and just the kind of that how big a moment it was in the context of the game as well?
Oh, it was huge in the context of the game, because obviously the Coombs try comes soon after that, and O'Gara was asked about it and said 14-point swing. I suppose you could be kind to Teddy Thomas and say La Rochelle maybe wouldn't have got the conversion, so maybe it was just a 12-point swing, but it was huge. And made all the more huge by the fact that Munster went down and scored a great try then through Coombs. I thought, given all that happened, maybe people didn't talk about just how well Coombs does for that try, because there were so many big moments. But the thing as well was, and like I know we talked about this well on Saturday night, but like Teddy Thomas was having a good game. Like he was playing well before that, and we talk about his reputation for some of these moments, but like the way that he started the game, like he was really, really dangerous throughout up until that moment. But there were so many little shifts of momentum, I thought, that maybe Munster didn't get the credit for, because there were bigger moments to come. But like I would go back to, the way that they repelled the maul at the end of the first half, which then made La Rochelle kick the points. So I think for them to keep it within 3 points at halftime rather than 7 points, I thought was huge as well. And to Luke's point, is a credit to the pack, because I know that obviously they got the penalty try later on off the maul, but I thought Munster's maul defence against a maul that coming into the game you would have said would have been an area where La Rochelle could really make hay was really, really big throughout that game as well. And that's allied to the fact that they only gave away 1 scrum penalty as well. And again, you were looking at the set piece thinking this could be an area where La Rochelle excel. And by, I suppose, negating La Rochelle's obvious areas of strength, Munster were able to bring it down to a game of moments. And a lot of those moments went their way. And at the end, we're talking about a 1-point game. So you need all of those little moments to go your way. But to Luke's point, I agree 100%. I think it was the pack, and an unheralded pack in some cases, that really set the platform for that, both through how they managed at the set piece and most impressively to me, their maul defence as well.
And the point you made about the scrum as well, I think, is a good one, because Josh Wycherley ends up playing the guts of 70 minutes, I think, after Jeremy Loughman's injury, and you would have expected Winnie Antonio to maybe get 2 or 3 or 4 scrum penalties if someone had told you that before the game, but not so, just the one. If we're offering cliff notes, I think Gavin Coombs screaming in Nihai West's face after that try, he's lucky he doesn't get penalised for that. I think we can laugh about it and make comparisons to Sexton, O'Gara and Croke Park, but I don't know. I think that's the kind of thing that's crossing a line personally. But look, he did do great. Like, it was his big moment, but I just thought it was a little bit much.
I don't love any of that, to be honest with you, but I don't know if it didn't seem like a penalisable offence to me, but I just didn't like it either. It's not really I never done any of that myself, and I always used to think, I used to love when someone do it to you, because there's nearly always a time in the game where, like, if they want to lose that game, you know, it'd be nice shaking his hand after the game, wouldn't it? So, yeah, look, I think what it would, to keep it at the rugby level, I do think he was outstanding on the weekend. We talked about him, you know, about his kind of try scoring record. That's obviously a little bit different to the ones we were kind of mentioning, they're kind of close to the line.
No PowerPoint presentation needed for this.
No, but it's brilliant. Like, it was very. It was in keeping with the kind of the work ethic and that Munster kind of showed all day, and there was kind of chasing down things that, you know, possibly they weren't going to get any payout of, and, you know, looking for those marginal gains at nearly every single opportunity they could. And whether that was, as I said about Peter O'Mahony, you know, he mightn't have even been hitting the tackler, but he's hitting the guy, the latcher. He's, you know, making it awkward for the nine. It was kind of, you know, very. I think evident throughout the team that was something that they were going to be trying to win, those kind of no talent moments, and they kind of came up big at the end with the talent moment. But the other ones, I think all those no talent moments throughout the game kind of set the stage for the end, and put them right in the mixer, which is all you can really ask down there. And then it's up to your kind of your skill players to get you over the line, which is what they did. So delighted for Coombs. I think he's kind of had a tough break, you know, the last couple of years where he's just not really featured in the Irish team. And look, he's got some very stiff competition there, but this is another moment for him to say, well, look at that performance, like, you know, and he can pick up the phone to Andy Farrell, I think, off the back of a couple of big performances the next time his squad's been selected, and say, what's going on here? Like, why are you still considering me? Is there anything else I can be doing? It looks to me like, when I'm looking at my video, that there isn't that much of a difference between myself and the guys you're picking. And one of the guys you're picking ahead of me is playing 6 on the weekend for Leinster. So, you know, what's going on there? And I think he's put himself right back in the frame for me to, you know, in the international conversation. So a brilliant performance by him. As I said, not a massive fan of the kind of chat after the try. I think the try itself is deflating enough for the opposition to me.
It wasn't an easy touch to take on his foot either. Like, you see players make that mistake. You know, the ball slightly running away from him. I think he still had a good bit to do to finish that off.
Oh, it was a cool head.
So, like, I can maybe understand him screaming in his face.
Well, obviously the blood's up, you know what I mean? Because it is a brilliant bit of skill to execute.
But my thought was more like, if it had been Leinster against the High West, to be like, oh, this is for all the ones you've done us. But it's like, they probably never met until that moment. I literally say they've never been face to face until that. But
I do think he's in that world, isn't he, where you know, I'd say he probably feels a little bit hard done by, you know, because he's very reliable for Munster, I think. So I'd say he kind of has all that kind of pent up emotion every time he has a kind of, you know, a big moment in the red. You know, he's clearly a guy who plays with that kind of emotion and that passion. So, you know, it spills over there, but it's not a big deal for me.
Because, Jonathan, like, I know we're forecasting forward a lot with this question, but like guys like Gavin Coombs, like John Hodnett as well, like I expect them to be key guys in this summer tour. That, like, obviously with Simon East to be gone, but I feel like a few Munster guys really put their hand up over the weekend. Obviously Leinster won well, but a lot of those guys will likely be on the Lions tour, so maybe not as many go in the summer. And when we're talking about what the team could look like come Chicago, there's a couple of guys there who, if they go and have good ends to the season, like there's a huge game obviously this Saturday in Bordeaux, you know, who knows, maybe they could force their way onto a Lions tour. I'm probably looking like a long shot, but that summer tour could be very important, and who knows how things might shake out by the time we get back in November.
Yeah, I think so. And I think there'll be an awful lot of those Munster players that, you know, there was a key thread through some of the key performers in that game that they probably didn't feel like they've got a fair crack of the whip with Ireland historically, or even especially in the Six Nations. And I would put Calvin Nash in that group as well, because I appreciate, obviously, he has got a rake of caps, but not getting picked for that game initially, where Osborne was picked ahead of him, like, I think he probably will have felt hard done by through that. And I thought he had an absolutely brilliant game as well. The tackle on Teddy Tom at the end of the first half, again, just in a game of so many big moments, that one I think probably got lost in the shuffle a wee bit. That was a huge tackle that I think stopped the try. So John Hodnett, again, some huge moments in that game. And I think there is a sense of disappointment among some people that an awful lot of these players that are going to get their chance in the summer are going to be doing it really in front of Paul O'Connell and a coaching ticket that is not the Ireland coaching ticket. But if they impress on this summer tour, like you say, well, there is a chance, and there is a natural regeneration of this squad that's going to happen with the three guys stepping away. But also just the fact that, you know, they finished third in the Six Nations. ultimately, for what we thought they were going to do, it was slightly underwhelming that they finished third. So there will be a natural blooding of other players into the squad. The squad will change going into November. And I think if we take this as the next level down from Test rugby, there were an awful lot of guys that showed that they are ready to step up.
Someone's fired up for a bit of a row in your house as well, are they?
Yeah, I don't know whether that's a postman or what it is, but they've done very well to this point. But
and I know like a lot of the line selections may be written in pencil after the Six Nations, but like say out half, for instance, like Marcus Smith, you know, after the weekend, 62-0. I'd say he's maybe being erased if he was in a probable. It's not, I mean, he might not have been anyway. But like, say if Munster go and win again this weekend in Bordeaux, and Crowley and Casey look unbelievable again, there's still selections like that I think Andy Farrell might be influenced by, or is Champions Cup too far away from the Test arena?
Oh, I don't know. I think when you get to the latter stages, I mean, you look at all the internationals that'll be playing, you know, this weekend. Like, you know, I think in all those teams, you know, I think
like
there's
La Rochelle, and if you go to Bordeaux and win again and play well again, that'll count for something. Especially say at halfback when there's not like 3 nailed on people. I don't think at 9 or 10.
I agree. No, I do. The one thing for me that kind of upsets the apple cart there for people at that is that, you know, maybe not so much Casey, but certainly Crowley is, you know, what he decides to do with Owen. Owen Farrell's back this weekend as well. So
and they be coming to Galway to play Connacht.
So yeah, I don't know. I think he's like, if you think about the composition of the squad and he plays well over the next couple of weeks, just given his experience, I mean, he's a no-brainer to pick. He's a no-brainer to pick for me because he could easily fill in that kind of captaincy role if you want him. And certainly, if you're not going to do that, he would be a great addition to have to your to your leadership team at a very minimum. So that's the one there that I'm watching closely.
I don't know if I can get into this row again. I feel like I've had this row on like 3 different podcasts across the last couple of weeks.
I can see your ire raising. No, but look, I do think that is something that, you know, might play against Crowley and possibly Prendergast. I think it's Finn Russell.
Well, what a Sophie's choice for Andy Farrell, his son or his surrogate new guy in Sam Prendergast, who's being
surrogate,
who's being treated like a son in some teams.
I think Finn Smith, and
Finn Russell are nailed on. There's one out half there.
Exactly. Yeah. So it's whether you go with someone who's got a little bit of versatility. So that's going to be probably Marcus Smith. Again, that's not a nice way to go out 62-0, but let's face it, that is not down to him.
No, but does not lead your team to a single point. I feel like that has to be a little.
You're getting absolutely smoked.
62-7, I'd be like, okay, it's still bad, but at least.
But that Leinster defence has really changed this year. So look, that's suffocating there. Like, no matter how good you are, and he did have 1 or 2 moments. I thought, like, you know, in attack, he could definitely. I don't think it's up for debate about how good he is going forward. It's always about, you know, does he have the kicking game? Does he have the control of the game? You know, can he stand up defensively? He's usually okay there. He does make his tackles. I don't think it's I don't think with Marcus Smith that it's you know, a lack of a willingness. That's one thing I will not say about him. But at the same time, he does have a size issue. He's too small for me to be playing in. You know, he let you down somewhere in the big games. And it's not his fault. It's not a head thing, which I think is the worst thing you could say about someone. It's just a pure size thing.
And in terms of 9, outside of Gibson Park, I don't think there's a nailed on number 9. Like, there's some other good candidates: Alex Mitchell, maybe Thomas Williams from Wales, Ben White. There's a few different guys kind of knocking around, but there's no one outside of Gibson Park I think that's automatically guaranteed to go. So while Casey missed the Six Nations, if he has another really good game this weekend and Munster win, then I think he might be able to force his way in.
I think that's definitely a debate. I agree with that. That's certainly up for debate, and he's definitely in there. Like in that grouping of player, like he would have been playing behind Gibson Park if he wasn't injured during Six Nations. I'm pretty sure of that. You know, I know he's a little bit muddled at the start of the season, but he actually I thought he got his act together for Munster and has been playing very well.
Last 2 weeks.
And then obviously, but even before his injury, I thought he was actually doing okay for Munster. He had a few decent games, so I thought he was going to get back in the mix, to be honest with you, for Six Nations.
And like, there's a guy like, you know, Tui Pilato who didn't play the Six Nations, but like obviously. Like,
if he's fit, he's got to go.
So like, you know, there's different rules.
He has to play a game before he goes.
Yeah, and like there's a few guys like, so I'd be interested to see, Jonathan, any perspective on the Lions chat?
I think Craig Casey's the interesting one for me because I think it will be Mitchell. I think will be number 2, but I think that number 3 position is wide open, and I think obviously there is the trust there with Andy Farrell as well. We've already seen with his coaching selections that he's not going to be afraid of being accused of looking at things through green tinted glasses. So I could see Casey with a big game this week, I could see him definitely being right back in that mix. And I think that would be great for him and great for Ireland as well, because I think it was a big blow for him to miss the Six Nations. I think Ireland missed him during the Six Nations. That's no knock on Conor Murray, but I just think at the start of that South Africa tour, you could see that he looked really ready to make a step up. And in terms of leadership, he looks like he's becoming a real leader for Munster as well. You know, that's always been said, that he has that character to fill that role. And I think now that allied with the experience means that, realistically speaking, you know, obviously Peter O'Mahony stepping away, Tyburn remains incredible, but I think this is going to become Casey and Crowley's team. So a Lions tour for Casey could be huge for his development, I think, as well.
Yeah, definitely be one of the interesting subplots for this weekend. I want to get both of your opinions on this at the very end of the game. I suppose the high tackle wasn't obviously given. When I saw it in real time, I thought it was definitely going to be given. Just the fact that we were in La Rochelle alone, I thought this is definitely going to be given. And then obviously, like, I didn't have a ref link or anything, so you're kind of like interpreting what's going on, and you're thinking, okay, they're going to the TMO, this has to be given now. Not so. Do you think it was a penalty? Luke, I'll go to you first.
I'm on the edge with it. I'm really on the edge. I just think the body height thing, it muddles it a little bit, but I think if you were going letter of the law, I'd say yes, and it's a penalty, just a penalty. But like, you know, I don't know. I feel like I'm going to get a barrage of abuse for that, but I do think it probably was.
I think so too.
But it would have felt like a tough one.
Yeah.
I would have felt hard done by.
I thought in the round Munster deserved their win, so I'm glad how it played out. Yeah. But Jonathan, what did you think? Like, I thought, even though like Jagu takes the ball so low to the ground, that is like, the referee is right, I think, in what he says, but it's still a seatbelt tackle. Like, it's still the technique of the tackle still kind of goes over the shoulder and catches him there. So if I was Ronan O'Gara, I would be pretty annoyed at that.
Yeah, well, I asked O'Gara about it afterwards, and the interesting thing to me was that was his secondary concern, because his primary concern was that he said that they were told that they were going to be really hot on hands in the ruck, and he looked at the other games to that point in the weekend, saw all these hands in the ruck penalties being given, and was aggrieved that they had not called that. So he thought it was a breakdown penalty rather than, he added the high contact as an afterthought, which I thought was interesting. Now, to be fair to him, he did say, look, this is all just sour grapes, the better team won. But having been asked directly about the decisions, he clearly wasn't happy that it wasn't a penalty for the hands in the ruck of the breakdown rather than the seatbelt tackle.
That is interesting, because I did think, I thought it was quite, there was, but on both sides of it, the ref was quite slow to give like holding penalties as well. You know, like when players were in good positions, I thought he's one of these guys which I really don't like. It's like an extra second or second and a half before he actually gives the penalty to the defender. Because I think it's really dangerous. I think you guys are really exposed. The longer they're in that position, I think the more exposed they are. But it's interesting to say that was the communication from the referees to the coaches, because I didn't know that, obviously, it's the first time I've heard about it, but it did feel to me like you were able to be very, very competitive at the ruck, you know. And I actually thought Munster did it very well.
As 14 turnovers.
Yeah, but they did do it really well. But it didn't really feel like I thought he just was that little half a second long, or maybe I'm being harsh saying it's a second, but it just felt like a little bit of that all day. And certainly, like, you know, it was a bit of a mess in there at times. I thought it was messy enough, but I thought Munster did it really well. You know, so there's a bit of both going on.
It was a wild game. Like, it was a tough one to referee, to be fair. Like, it wasn't like,
Munster were so physical in there.
So many flashpoints, with so many controversial incidents.
But both teams, like, I think when they're rolling, like even La Rochelle, when they're kind of rolling with the pack, they actually kind of commit heavily enough to the ruck. Like, they make sure they get like really quick ruck ball. Like, they really go like, and Munster. I think we're up for the fight there, and they, as I said to you at the start, I do think they committed heavily enough on the defensive side to the ruck. And look, if you don't get the pay, if the ball does come quick, if the referee is really hot on pinging you there, you know, with hands in the ruck, and you know, if people are lying in bad positions, etc., if they're really, really hot at making sure that's clean and quick, you know, committing there is difficult, but also if you do it, you leave yourself very exposed. And maybe there is something to feel aggrieved at if that was the messaging that they were giving out.
The turnover count would indicate that one team thought a breakdown contest was unlikely to be rewarded, because it was like 14-5, and Munster were like, oh, I must have missed that memo over the ball. Because they certainly got a lot of change in that area. The last thing I'll say on La Rochelle, Jonathan, is that it's funny, like, they've played 3 home games, two against Leinster and 1 against Munster, and in all 3 there's been like a familiar pattern of La Rochelle like having a lot of ball around the line and really struggling to make it pay. Like the one 2 years ago when it was like raining very heavily. I remember they eschewed a couple of kicks at goal in the second half and really went for the juggler and didn't get over the line. The one earlier this season against Leinster, they were pounding away in the first half and didn't get over the line. And then obviously we mentioned the kind of a litany of chances they had at the weekend. It's just funny, they've all felt very kind of similar games in some ways. Unbelievable games as well. It's no solace to La Rochelle. I'm sure that they've played their part in 3 very memorable matches in the recent past. But it's interesting that they haven't been rectified.
Yeah, and I think part of that comes down to recruitment. We talked last week and we talked in January that we didn't think the recruitment's been great. Like Jack Noel had a good chance before in the same passage as the Teddy Tallman not scoring the try. Jack Noel had a chance in that passage as well where he couldn't get over in the corner either. He had a pretty quiet game, I thought. And
they miss Dante a bit, don't they? Do you think they miss Dante? I think he's huge.
I think they always do. Yeah, I think he's such an important player for them, especially in those sort of tight exchanges that we're talking about, in trying to get over the line, trying to make that sort of even half a yard after contact. I think he's so important. But they do just give the impression of a group that has reached the end of the line, and they're getting to that point where they can't look ahead to the guys that are coming in next year. Like O'Gara made that point last week that they don't have the luxury of looking ahead yet because of the situation that they're in the top 14. But when you look at Ninesh Philly coming in, they're being linked with Menoncello now, which would be another huge signing, obviously, and Legaric as well, who they'll probably try and build that team around with Kerr Barlow going. Like they could be a completely different proposition next year, but like as O'Gara has alluded to himself, they have to get this right in the top 14 over the next five or six games.
Yeah, he's got to get there, hasn't he?
Yeah, this is just a season just to take their medicine and regroup. I think I've seen enough from them when they're playing well this year to know that they can get back, I think, to competing at the top. So, it was interesting just to kind of talk to some locals over the weekend about Ronan O'Gara and what, and they all were still very positive about him. There was a single person I spoke to who was like, we need to get rid of this guy. Obviously, that'd be mad. Like, so I think with those guys coming in and what they've shown, I do think I'd expect them to be still very competitive next year.
You would want them to turn around the league for him. Like
they're not going to get relegated. Like so.
No.
Well, you talk about speaking to locals, like Friday night and Saturday morning, like anyone that you spoke to about the game were more like, yeah, well, we have to have to stay in the top 14. That's more important. And then there's also, I suppose, the theory that they were saying that O'Gara's contract, regardless of whether they want to move on from, which I don't think they do, but his contract would make it very hard for them to move on anyway.
Yeah,
there's still 2 years of it left.
Yeah,
but you could, I think Will's point though, like you've kind of seen enough of them, like they're still I think they're probably at that point, and it's recognised from the guys that he's bringing in. You can see what they're trying to achieve. Like it's not unclear, the position. Like they'll be in a better position next year, I do think.
Because there's still nice stuff there. Like
great, you're not starting from scratch there. That's certainly not a start from scratch job. You know what I mean? And I think
some of the moments of them in full flow, like the opening try that was disallowed. There was one early in the second half that Jagu almost went in the corner when they were offloading, and they're like, "Geez, like how do you stop this team?" And that was the thing. It was the same against Leinster in certain passages in the game earlier this year, but they just didn't make it pay either.
Yeah, it's just a little bit of cutting edge, and it's just teams can go through these phases where whether they need to rethink maybe the attack or what they're doing in certain parts of the pitch, and just even a little bit of confidence sometimes is what you need. You need a win. You need to get a big win to just get that belief back in you. And I think that's probably where this team is at the moment. So I do think they need to arrest the decline pretty quickly. Rod's obviously very aware of that. Good to hear that the news on the ground was kind of similar enough. You're always a little bit concerned, aren't you, in France, that there's that kind of knee-jerk reaction. But I think he's earned the right to try and guide them through this tricky period. And to you would think, looking at some of those names, if they do get them over the line, that they'll be in a strong position next year.
And even making sure they qualify for the Champions Cup, even obviously like top 6 in France is the playoffs, but top 8 at the moment, depending on what format. If we're presuming the format will be the same next year, which I guess I'm not sure if that actually is guaranteed, but top 8 in France will get you into the Champions Cup. We might leave this game for now. We can circle back to Munster Bordeaux at the end, but Leinster 62, Luke, Harlequins 0. Like, what do you say about this one? Like,
the less said, the better from Harlequins' point of view. I thought it was a shocking performance. I thought they were so open all day. You know, we talked about, like, I felt for Hodden. Hodden had a brilliant game, but like Van der Fleer was unbelievable throughout the game. I don't know how many big breaks he made, how many good decisions he made.
He was
throughout the game.
stampeded over someone in the first half on the
he was
wing.
unbelievable. It was one of the best games I've seen him play. But at the same time, like as I mentioned about Prendergast, you're kind of going, like Prendergast looked unbelievable to me. Some was passing, some was running lines. Brilliant. But like it was so open. It was like a game of tip rugby at times, you know. So, look, good performance from Leinster. They move on to the next level or the next stage of the competition. Glasgow certainly won't be like that. Glasgow will put up a bit of a fight against Leinster. They'll respect them. They'll know the power that's on show, but they'll also, not fear them. I don't think, just because they play them more regularly in the league as well. I think there's probably a bit of that goes on. That familiarity. I think they'll probably know the areas more clearly about, where you would want to attack Leinster, maybe how you get some pay out of them. They'll probably have a few more ideas about maybe how they attack them, what's worked against Leinster. So, yeah, Glasgow's not a name I love seeing for Leinster there. I'd nearly rather one of the kind of, a Cast or someone like that maybe, even though there's...
Well, geez, of course. Yeah, who wouldn't love to prefer to play Cast?
But if you looked at probably the team sheets, Cast might be, they're still very strong, and you think of budget and etc. That's probably... on the face of it, a more a bigger challenge. Obviously, we know the familiarity, I think, makes it more difficult for Leinster. So, for them, look, it was
they haven't played at full strength in a while. Like they actually haven't often played Glasgow with the two teams actually stacked. Actually, is it going back to?
I think was it close enough in? Was there a league match?
They played in the final in Celtic Park. That's going back before COVID. I'm not sure if they've actually gone locked and loaded against each other. I could be missing like an obvious one, but I don't know.
Is Tuipolotu back or no?
No,
not yet. He still is another few weeks, is he? Yeah, no, it's an interesting one. He's so big for them. Like he's massive for Glasgow. You would expect Leinster to have too much there, as they do against most teams. To be honest, like they have to have a bit of a blooper. But look, I thought it was good. There was a few good signs. I thought Keenan was really good in the weekend. Some of his passing was very good. He was in great positions a lot of the time. And generally, nearly every time he touched the ball, there was something good happening around him. So that's good because there's a little bit of uncertainty now about that full back. So it looks like Kinghorn is most people's selection there. I'm probably still a Keenan man for the Lions, to be honest. I just think he's so good. I think he's the best fullback in the world, to be honest. But Kinghorn's probably the guy maybe who's edging that selection at the moment, just based off Six Nations.
The only thing for Keenan is he'll get the first couple of cracks because Kinghorn, with Toulouse's involvement in the top 14 final.
I hadn't thought of that.
Yeah, Kinghorn probably won't get to play the first 3 matches of the tour. So if Keenan will probably get to play the one in Dublin and maybe one other one. So if he starts really well, then Kinghorn would have to come in and play lights out immediately, probably to maybe
possibly exhausted after that finish if they go all the way. So that's interesting. I hadn't thought of that kind of that issue that Kinghorn might have coming in. And I thought Lowe was he's so good, isn't he? Like he's brilliant. Like he's so good. Like when his
last try was a joke. Like
but he's so hard to contain, isn't he? And I think when he's playing well, some of his kicking was really good as well. We just come to, I think, nearly assume that that's going to be the case. But his long kicking, it's such a trick. It's a great weapon to have in your team, and the offloading ability. Just good things happen around Lowe. A little bit like Snyman, with his offloading, maybe kind of in different contexts. But like good things happen around them. So like if I was playing with them, you're just going to say hover around. If the ball's close to him, you expect it. And what else? Yeah, Prendergast is an interesting one. I just saw a few tackles I didn't love on the weekend again. I just wish he would just get that a little bit sorted, or just be a little bit more focused on it, because his attacking play is just sublime, isn't it? Like he's great to watch. The range of passing, even some of the shorter ones, those delay passes that everyone kind of has highlighted. I mean, just lovely to play outside. And kind of drifts into nice positions with the ball, and it's always cocked ready for a pass, that kind of position. It's a really lovely skill. I think Sexton was unbelievable at that skill. Obviously something that Prendergast obviously is very good at too. So look, the pack, I mean, it's a formidable outfit. Like that's just too much for that Quins pack to take. Even though they competed okay for the first kind of 10 minutes, they looked physically up for it, but then afterwards I just thought Leinster blew them apart, and it could have actually been worse at the start of it. I thought Leinster kind of dropped a few balls here, didn't take advantage. Like if they were a little bit more compact, I think they really could have even put up a worse score for Quins. But the one thing I would say is that was so disappointing was that to be nilled, to get 62-0. We're going to talk about the Ulster game. We talked briefly off air about it. Like the game was done, but like there was a bit of fight out of Ulster. They at least got a few tries towards the end when the game was kind of opening up. Like to get nothing from Quins, like that's embarrassing. And no matter what the coach said after the game about like budgets, etc., like really, like have a look in the mirror. It's tough for me. I thought they ran out the gate quickly.
Jonathan, anything you want to add in the Leinster game?
Yeah, I thought it was a strange a strange performance from Quins. Like, we all know that they can't. Sorry, defense is not their strong suit, but like, to Luke's point about them not scoring to not score a point, whenever you see them in full flow, and like they tore Ulster apart last year, like last January, like, and they were really, really good that day. But again, we talk about Lions, that's not a good day for Marcus Smith, obviously, It was just across the board in a weekend where we did have an awful lot of games like this. That was obviously the worst performance. But I thought I thought they were in it for, I would give them longer than what Luke said. I thought they were in it for maybe 15 to 20 minutes. And then from that point on, just looked like they had accepted that there was no chance that they were going to win and we're just trying to get out of there. So it was a really disappointing showing in a last 16 knockout game, because as much as we can talk about Munster and La Rochelle, and like Ulster Bordeaux had its moments too, like this is what other people look at whenever the detractors of this competition will point to and say, well, and you can throw in, well, I was going to say you can throw in the Sarries game as well, but the Sarries game was more competitive than that, even though they shipped more points. So
that was like, I checked the score. It was like a basketball score. I think it was 35-13 when I checked the score, and then I didn't check again until full time. And I was honestly about as flabbergasted. I couldn't believe. I was like, what on earth happened in the 30 minutes I didn't check my phone?
Do you know what I was looking at though? The English teams. So Northampton obviously get through, right? But the best, they concede the least points out of any of the English teams, 24 points, which is, okay. You could kind of win those games generally-ish, but it's still a lot, not exactly a comprehensive performance, but every other one was like 40-point concession. Like, so that's a league issue. That's not just a... Yeah. And
that's
I think
the way the Premiership
it is.
Anyone watching the Premiership at the weekend will not be surprised by some of the concessions. And like the margins of victory across the 8 games: 1 point, 2 points, 12 points, 22, 23, 24, 30, and 62.
Yeah, ugly.
Like, so, and like one of them, so was obviously the Munster La Rochelle. Then you had Cast Benetton, which was kind of turned out to be one of the dramatic games of the weekend. Maybe people probably didn't catch it, I'd imagine, compared to some of the other matches. But yeah,
that one was for the purists. I think
that was one for the purists.
That was for the purists.
Yeah, I think I might have kicked off the same time as Munster La Rochelle, if I'm not mistaken. So
no, it was because it was being played whenever we were walking through. So I think it ended just before the Munster La Rochelle.
Also, it was Leinster Quins then probably when that kicked off. So to be fair, people might have turned over after.
Quite clearly, I was having my little nap then before Munster.
So yeah, no, it really was a kind of a case of like one or two good games saving the weekend. Jonathan, you obviously went on to Bordeaux on Sunday for that game. I think it's the 4th game in a row and the 6th out of the last 7th when Ulster have been trailing by double digits, like to start the game, like, which is, you're never gonna. I know they've come back against the Stormers, they came back against the Scarlets, to get wins in those matches, but that's not a good recipe for success. And the Dragons was another one where they came back to win, but still trailed, opening those games by double digits. Were you pleased with the fight you saw? Were you concerned with it? Was the 21-0 that it would kind of make it a bit of a damn squib after that in terms of what we saw coming later? How do you assess Ulster's overall outing there?
Yeah, I mean, it was an odd game. Like, I suppose starting from the fact that, Ulster's team bus couldn't get down a street to get to the stadium, and they're dismounting from the bus and walking through the crowd to get to the stadium. Like, it's a weird start to the day. Like, and, if Munster La Rochelle was described as like a heavyweight boxing fight, this felt more like WWE in the sense that it was still entertaining, but there was an inherent silliness to the whole thing, probably starting from that point with Ulster walking into the stadium.
Cage match.
Yeah, like it was just... you always got the impression that Bordeaux had another level to get to. So whenever Ulster, I suppose, pulled within 7 points initially after going 21-0 down, to not get to half time at 21-14 was a huge blow for Ulster. And I think they were 19 seconds away with the ball, but then just a brilliant counter attack from Bordeaux, which is what they have. They obviously have feelings as a team, but their ability in transition is unbelievable, and we saw that loads over the weekend. But
that was a disappointing one. That one for me, Jonathan. Of all the, I just felt like, Stockdale obviously over chasing, well spotted by Carberry in fairness. And, it's just one of those ones I talked about Munster and how close they were or how tight knit they were on their kind of kick chase. If you were playing Bordeaux, that'd be the one area you go, oh lads, just keep your shape, just work together here. Don't be going off with kind of solo runs. And then even when they get through and the ball goes to Pinot, and I know I'm not looking for Larry to make the tackle, but at least lay a glove. And he was about 5 yards away from him, and I know he's chasing hard across and Pinot's pace, but I don't know. That was the one for me. I was like, at least break his stride or something, Larry, and obviously the Stockton bit where he over chases. It's just not a great way to start the game, isn't it? You're the one thing you'd be saying against Bordeaux is, lads, any of these guys touch the ball, it's a 2-man, 3-man job, and work together. Don't panic. I don't know. Is any thoughts on that part? I was the one. I was
like 100%
disappointed in that part. And
I think if it was any other team, and you looked at the upheaval that they had going into the game with arriving late and stuff, you would have said that contributed to the slow start. But this is just what Ulster do now,
Yeah.
Will had the stats there at the start. Like, they have become a team that are bad at starters, bad out of the blocks, and then they're giving themselves these holes to get out of. And the defense is obviously in transition. They've changed defense coaches halfway through the season. That's probably the area where, to my mind, they've made the least amount of gains, probably understandably, over the course of the season, because I think, we're a year in, so we should be, but we're now starting to see what a Richie Murphy team looks like with ball in hand. I think Jack Murphy coming in at 10 and having a settled 10 has really helped that over the last month or so. But they really need to work on the defensive side of the game. Obviously, with Willie Falloon has been in there, but Willie Falloon getting the job, becoming defense coach next season, you're probably looking to see that align. But I mean, to go back to Will's first point, like, I don't want to sound dismissive of what Ulster did by saying the game was a bit silly. Like, it was, but like, I think Ulster can almost take more from that game than they did from their preceding 3 wins, I think, personally, because there was an awful lot of talk that this team, 16th seed playing against the first seed, having only won 1 game in the pool stages, that they didn't really deserve to be in the knockouts, that they would have been, some people were saying they would have been better off in the Challenge Cup and having a run through the Challenge Cup. But I think what the likes of McNabney can take from that experience, what the likes of Ward can take from that experience, and even at completely the other end of the spectrum, what Jacob Stockdale can take from that experience of players looking like they are on the right stage in the European Cup. Admittedly, Bordeaux maybe aren't among that top tier of teams that we thought they maybe were. Again, Ronan O'Gara was very interesting on Saturday night, where he described them as a juggernaut that's taken a belt over the last couple of months. Did not think that they were as good a team now as they were September through March at all, but that is still a quality team to my mind. And I think there were an awful lot of Ulster players that will take an awful lot from those 80 minutes, or I suppose 60 minutes really, maybe not the first 20, but I think it was a game that certainly after 21 minutes you were thinking could have got out of hand. Certainly you were thinking could have been a particularly damaging day. But conversely, I think now it actually gives them a little bit of momentum going into that URC run-in, which I know we talked about over the last couple of weeks, is difficult, and it is going to be a big ask to make the playoffs. But I think they'll feel better about their chances today than they did last week.
Yeah, and you compare that to the Quins' performance, and that's probably a similarly tough assignment going over to Bordeaux. They didn't get nailed. They put 31 points on them. They're regardless of when those points were scored in terms of the game kind of being, probably done and dusted, really, you still have to score the tries. It still shows a fight. It still shows that, you can break apart a good team, with some good play. So, yeah, I actually think it's a good point, Jonathan. I do think, the start, you've got to get something sorted there, whether it's simplifying things, whether it's just clarifying things in players' heads about how they're going to go about, playing the start of the game, whether that's in possession, but probably more so, as Jonathan alluded to, out of possession. Like, what do you like? You need some real clarity of thought there. Like, what's happening here? Who are the guys to watch out for? What are the other team trying to achieve when they're attacking? Like, what are the shapes you're going to see more often than not? So I'd say, look, Willie, he's an ex-teammate, Irish Schools teammate, absolute top man, tough as all boots. In fairness, Willie. So I think, you know, you'd hope that he's the guy that gets that right for them, and they can kind of row in behind whatever his thinking is. But it does seem like they need to get that part of the game resolved and clear up their thinking on it, because I think, as Jonathan said, there was lots of positives and lots of people did not look out of place on that pitch on the weekend. And there's enough of them that didn't look out of place in that game on the weekend that you kind of said to yourself, well, they belong at this level. They need to get that right. They can't be putting themselves in this position every week where they've got to claw it back when the other team is kind of letting the foot off the gas. You know, that's not what we want to be saying about Ulster going forward.
I do agree with the positive spin on it, though, that I'm feeling much more confident in their chance of getting in the top 8 than when we first went through their fixture list, Jonathan, and we're kind of penciling in, you know, probably losses for a lot of them. I think I would fancy them to beat the Sharks at home now after what I've seen from the Sharks and Ulster in the last couple of weeks. I think it'll come down to that Edinburgh game away on the last day. That'll be like a cup final. I think that could be win or go home kind of thing, which would be massive.
The Munster game takes on a different complexion now as well, because
yeah,
like whenever we were talking about that originally, we obviously weren't really thinking that Munster were going to be have their eye on Europe as well.
And they could still have, like, from what you saw from Bordeaux at the weekend, do you give Munster a decent chance of going there and winning, or is that just one step too far, having to back up like one epic win and basically having to redo it again 7 days later?
It would be so impressive if they did, for that very reason. Of it was something that Costello spoke about immediately afterwards, and actually I thought quite impressively how soon he was focused on this, where he was saying, you know, this isn't our cup final. We want 3 more days like this. I think the disappointment again, and you know, I hate to keep going back to this, but the disappointment again is that the tournament does not allow for the same occasion next week that we had this week, because there's no way, presumably, that 3,000 Munster fans can get to Bordeaux 7 days after having been in La Rochelle. Like, there's just not. The last 16 followed a week later by the quarterfinals, to me, is almost the biggest problem with this tournament, because it takes away what should be the best part of it, which is fans. And I think, for all the talk that there's been about what that added to not just the occasion, but what it added to Munster, you know, walking about, seeing the fans in the morning, being sent videos of fans milling about outside the stadium before they played the game, and how much they took from that won't be there this week. I'm fascinated to see how many Munster fans do get there, but it's not going to be the same number. But like, I admit that I hadn't really looked too deeply into it until I was doing the prep for the game on Sunday. Like, that Bordeaux have had a bit of a wobble, and fair enough, they, you know, Jalabert started on the bench, BLBRE was not playing at all, so they've got those guys to come back in. But I do think there's a possibility there for Munster. I don't think I'd be predicting that they'll do it, but there is certainly a chance there that they can.
If the pack perform like they did against La Rochelle,
and the Bordeaux pack isn't as good as La Rochelle.
They're not. Now, they're a bit kind of more expansive. You can see the offloading of that. But I think Munster would do better against that type than I'd say Ulster did. Do you know that kind of way? There was periods where, you know, there was a few periods where there's a lot of offloads kind of got away. I think Munster's pack probably a little bit better than Ulster's at the moment. Actually, probably better, I'd say. I think they're a better pack when they've got everyone on the pitch. I think they're a better pack than Ulster. I think that's fair enough to say. I think at the moment, I think they contain that.
Kicking will be key. Like, they'll need to kick better than Ulster did.
Yeah.
But with Casey and Crowley, you think that they would.
I think they've got 2 better operators in there, don't they? Would be my opinion at the moment. If Casey, you know, they're both. You could argue Gibbs Park is definitely in at 9, but Casey's definitely in number 2 behind him, and I think, for me, as my opinion on the out half situation in Ireland, like, I think Crowley is probably the guy I'd be picking at the moment. But that's anytime you play against a team with a good pack and 2 good kickers, who can kind of control the game, 9 and 10 good players. Difficult. If they show up physically. It's a
pity it's such a quick turnaround, because even like before we came on, I was jarred for a second. I saw a tweet from the Leinster account being like, only 3 more days until the big quarter final. I was like, what? On Friday, yeah. So I was like, God, it's like, how is like,
Yeah.
We hadn't even done our review. We hadn't even done our review of the last game, and I'm like, and it's already like, God, it's so. And obviously the Munster.
That's
game,
great. I can't wait.
Munster game is one more day after that. But you know what? I give Munster a great chance because like Bordeaux still haven't proven that they're at the top table. No. Like for all the great, like they BLB Ray, the Pinot, like. They lost at home to Harlequins in last year's quarter-final. They lost 59-3 to Toulouse in the top 14 final. Like we were talking about Quins not having a no-show.
Oh, that was a...
Bordeaux kicked 3 points at least, but like with BLB Ray and Penno playing, like they couldn't score, a try against Toulouse. So like they'll be under pressure. Like they're under pressure to deliver. There's a sense in that side of the draw to Toulouse, without Dupont and Capuozzo getting injured as well. Like they're there for the taking potentially. I don't know if I agree with that, but that's definitely a narrative that's out there.
Well, Dupont does change the picture. Capuozzo less so.
He does, but like Toulouse still have a really stacked team. But I think there's pressure on Bordeaux, and I could see Munster going there and winning. I definitely can. Like to see like if they can wheel out the same team they did at the weekend. I'd give them a great chance.
And I think if you've been in these, the Munster have the tradition and the competition, and they really want to do well in this thing, and they understand it. I think that's the thing. Like, while they haven't won it in a long time, they still understand this competition, whereas Bordeaux less so, I think. So that is a good point, I think.
Well, I'd be fascinated, like Jonathan did, I'd be fascinated to see how many Munster fans make it over there. Or I was thinking, are there replacement Munster fans who didn't go to La Rochelle who'd actually might take up the mantle? I already know a couple.
Impact subs.
I already know a couple who are going this weekend that didn't go last weekend. I know 4 off the top of my head who are going. So there could be maybe that kind of people, tagging in and replacing them. To use the wrestling analogy that we started off a little while ago. Jonathan, I do also want to touch on Connacht Racing this coming weekend. That's a fascinating match to me. We mentioned the Owen Farrell subplot. That's the thing I'll be really interested in, because this is kind of his shop window. Like Racing are really struggling in the French league, so they won't have playoff places. Obviously, that wouldn't impact him going on the tour, but even to put his hand in the shop window. Whereas this is kind of the way he can get some attention between now and the selection day. And also,
I love the idea that it's a short window for him when it's his dad picking the team. Like,
hey, Dad, it's me, Owen.
Want to go for a kicking session at the back garden? Yeah.
But it's also a massive opportunity for Connacht. Like, this is probably their only chance, I would say, realistically, to get into the top 8, to qualify for the Champions Cup, because the top 8 in URC looks like a long shot with 2 games in South Africa to come. Which, even if they do win this weekend, makes that a potential semi-final a bit awkward. Leinster have had to manage that in the last couple of years too. But I'm really interested to see. It's Saturday night in Galway at 8:00, obviously. With the reduced capacity because of the revamp of the stadium, it won't be absolutely rocking, but it'll still be a good atmosphere. I think this is a great game to look forward to.
Yeah, absolutely. Like, Racing are obviously in a difficult season with Stuart Lancaster, but Stuart Lancaster departing. But like, the results have been good. I wouldn't read probably too much into what they did at the weekend against Perpignan, because yes, they went away and won, but like, Perpignan obviously have their own difficulties this season, and I would expect Racing, I think personally, to have more of an eye on the top 14. So I think this is a real opportunity for Connacht, and we've been speaking about this for months. Like, this is a real opportunity for Connacht, given the top level players that they have in their squad, with Bundy Aki, with Mike Hansen, with Finlay Beelum, to go on and win this competition, and to be playing at home. We never really know how French teams are going to travel. Racing have somewhat bucked that trend in previous years, but I just think they'll be coming here with a mind to perform in the top 14. And Connacht, as you allude to there, Will, are the complete other side of the coin, because they are now in a position where their best chance to achieve their aims for the season, which is probably Champions Cup qualification, is by winning the Challenge Cup. And it would be a great way to do, it would be a much more satisfying way to do it than finishing 8th in the URC and then getting beat by Leinster in a quarter-final anyway. So, like, we've been saying it for a while. This is a huge opportunity for Connacht, but like, I would back them in Galway this weekend against potentially disinterested French visitors to get the job done.
And we don't know what team Racing might pick. Like, that might have been their way of like getting Owen Farrell a start on home soil without having to travel. Not that Galway's that far, really, but like, you wouldn't know what team Racing might even send over. I hope they send over Owen Farrell, and I hope they send over a really strong team. But it's a great opportunity for Connacht.
Oh, it is, and it's the big advantage with the league makeups around relegation, isn't it? That the mentality change. Like, there's not going to be a question for Connacht this weekend. Where there is going to be a question hanging over, say, some of the English teams or some of the French teams around these kind of parts of these European competitions. One part where you can see clear edge kind of mentality wise, and it's a difficult place to go and play. It is. It'd be a fast game. Connacht, are good under pressure. Like, they're good under pressure there at times. I think they do generally show up, I think, on the big days there. Now, they don't always win, but I think, I could see them having, playing a fast brand against a French team that might be disinterested and punishing them there. I could see that. The issue for them, again, is going to be kind of similar to Ulster's. It's the defensive stuff with Connacht that I think you'd be most concerned about. If Racing do show up, if their pack do show up, like, can they contain that Racing team? That's the big question, isn't it? With Connacht. It's not going to be whether
Racing pick their full strength team and come over and deliver a good performance. They should maybe edge it, but that's not a guarantee.
Yeah, no, it's definitely.
I can't see that. Like, I can't see them whenever there's 7 points of a potential relegation playoff. Like, we talk about La Rochelle and how they had to focus on domestic matters. Like, Racing are 1 point in one place worse off than La Rochelle are. So there's 7 points above Perpignan here in the relegation playoff spot. Like, I just can't see it. And especially with it being the Challenge Cup, I just can't see them travelling with a huge amount of interest. Like,
yeah, because like with them winning the Challenge Cup, as you say, like that wouldn't really do anything for anyone there. I don't think they'd be like jumping up and down for joy. Obviously, a final would be nice, but to get there would be taxing enough that it might actually end up costing them dearly in the league. So I'll be fascinated to see what team they pick, because that'll obviously tell us a lot about what way the game might go.
Could they be interested in trying to get in Champions Cup next year through this avenue?
Yeah.
Potentially.
Yeah, that's probably the best way of looking at it potentially. But I kind of tend to lean towards Jonathan. I don't know. Don't know what kind of their mindset will be. Anything else before we finish up? Before we get predictions? Anything from the weekend that's worth mentioning from either of you?
I think we've covered most of it. I think, like, it's probably the disappointing thing is going to be was the Harlequins match. That had potential to be a bit of a cracker if they kind of showed up defensively, but they kind of ran out the gate. I think that was probably the big disappointment of the weekend for me. But I think hopefully it looks like we've got some pretty good matchups here coming up this weekend. I don't think anyone here is going to be running out the gate. Cast, you could argue maybe, where's their focus? But I think if they come this far in the competition, I think they'll be focused and it'll be difficult to beat.
They honestly might not send their first team. Like, we saw last year. I know the Bulls were coming from Pretoria, but the Bulls, the last 2 years, South African teams have sent weaker teams. They probably will send their strongest team, but they should. They haven't been. I think it's 2002 was the last time they reached the Champions Cup quarter-final. So, like, you're sort of over 20 years ago. Like, you'd like to think they'd throw
this far in the competition. You'd have to think.
To finish off then on predictions, guys, I go to you, Jonathan, first. How do you see the Leinster, Munster, and Connacht games going?
I think Leinster will win comfortably enough. I think Bordeaux will just edge Munster, and I think Connacht will beat an understrength, disinterested Racing.
I think Leinster will win well. I think Connacht will beat Racing, and I have a feeling Munster might sneak it again. I'm yet to be convinced by Bordeaux at the top table. Like, Bordeaux, if Munster can, if it can be done, curtail Penno and Bill Beret slightly. Like, if they're not rampant, I think they have enough everywhere else to match.
Carberry play this game, or you think Jalabert definitely?
I don't know. I feel like Carberry's been playing well the last couple of weeks, and Jalabert, I saw him play against. So they played Racing the week before Europe and lost, and he was very poor. And that was one of the surprising things when, like, maybe Rod's referring to about how they haven't been quite as good. So there's a sense that Carberry has been playing well, and I don't know if he'll get the nod, but certainly he might play a good.
You always wary of guys when they go away from a club and they play them again, that they just have a point to prove, that kind of way. So that's an interesting one to kind of watch that space, I suppose. Okay, so my predictions, I think I'm going to go, Leinster. I think they should beat Glasgow, but again, you'd hate to see such a familiar team there. I think they'll give a better account of themselves than, obviously not hard, but Quins. So I expect that one to be a little bit tighter, maybe people expect. I don't think that's a rampant one for Leinster. I'm a bit torn now on this Munster Bordeaux one, but I'm going to go Bordeaux. I think, at home. But I think this is a squeaky bum time one for them too. I think that's like within 5 points. Like, I think it could go either way for me. If Munster's pack show up like they did in the weekend, as I mentioned, and their halfbacks play as well, that's that'll be sweaty. That'll be sweaty there. And I'm gonna go. I think Connacht as well. I'm gonna go Connacht as well with Owen Farrell to play well and cement his Lions berth. I think Connacht should do that one. I think I'm gonna back them there. I generally, you get to this stage of the competition, you get a bit, shaky about, can Connacht take on a big pack. I'm going Connacht too.
That's 3 good games we have to look forward to. I'd like to thank Luke and Jonathan for joining me on this week's episode of the Left Wing Podcast. We will be back next week to review all the quarter-final games. Between now and then, thanks so much for listening. and goodbye.